Hello and welcome to the inaugural episode of Carved in Stone. I did a quick episode 0 introduction, but this is my first episode where I pick a topic and select my Mount Rushmore of that topic. So basically, my top 4. Just in case you missed episode 0, I'm going to explain a couple things real quick. I will mention more than 4 selections and explain why some got cut. Lists, of course, are subjective, and 4 is narrowing it down quite a bit, so I'll explain why some may fall just short of my mountain. I'm your host, Shawn Chabam, and on today's episode, I'm going to be giving you my Mount Rushmore of wrestling jobbers. Now, before I get into the 4 heads I've selected, I feel there's some qualifying factors you should know about how I put this together. I watched wrestling for a very specific time frame. I was watching hardcore from about WrestleMania's 3 to 10. I was a WWF, now E fan, and nothing else. I was aware of WCW, but I almost never turned it on. So you're going to get jobbers from that time period in the WWE, the golden era. If you ever worked as a jobber or you're just an avid wrestling fan, you may be screaming right now that they're called enhancement talent. Look, I'm not the purest fan, so I don't consider jobber to be a negative term. Sorry if you do, but also jobber Mount Rushmore sounds much better than enhancement talent Mount Rushmore. Sorry, not sorry, or we can call it Mount Jobbermore if you prefer. All right. Some of the jobbers I'm going to talk about actually found some success in the mid-card with WWE, but for the most part, they were there to lose week after week, often putting over upcoming stars on Saturday mornings. To me, what made a great jobber was a guy who could make you think, holy crap, he might win. And that's why I chose these 4 guys. At some point, I thought each of these guys would eventually score an upset. In fact, I really thought it was a matter of time for some of them. One guy who narrowly missed my list, and I'll get to honorable mentions momentarily, actually got a WrestleMania match. So you may already know who that is, or you may think he's getting slighted. You're entitled to your opinion. And let's give credit to the stars too. The stars they were putting over. It takes 2 to tango. And they needed an adversary who would let them look good in defeat. Some guys wouldn't do that for the enhancement talent. They just wanted to go out there and rip their heads off from bell to bell. But to me, if the jobbers got in a little offense, the match was more enjoyable. I preferred to see at least some competition, and I never held it against the stars if the jobbers got in a few solid blows. Okay, first up, 2 big omissions. One I alluded to earlier. He had a WrestleMania match, and that was SD Special Delivery Jones. He missed for me because I only vaguely remember him. I think he left WWE around 1990, but he wasn't being utilized a ton at that point. He competed, if you can call it that, in the first WrestleMania in a squash match against King Kong Bundy. They said he lost in 9 seconds. I've timed it. It was closer to 24. But regardless, he got crushed, and it was one of the worst matches in Mania history. That record, the faux 9-second record, by the way, stood as the shortest match in Mania history for 31 years until The Rock beat Eric Rowan in 6 seconds during an impromptu match at WrestleMania 32. Another omission, Leaping Lanny Poffo, Randy Savage's brother. He used to write poetry belittling the heels, which of course changed to belittling the faces when he turned heel himself. He did eventually rise to stardom, and even earned an upset over Hulk Hogan. But at the time I was watching, he was more of a low mid-carder. I don't really remember him that well as a jobber, so he gets left off. Dwayne Gill was probably the closest to making the cut of the guys I passed on. He just looked like the perfect jobber with his amateur wrestling outfit and generic look. He looked like a creator wrestler in a video game. He went on to some notoriety later as Gilberg. Look, he could compete. Gil was a nice wrestler, and it's too bad there wasn't a cruiserweight division in the early 90s because maybe he could have showcased his skills there. I'm not saying he would have been a champion, but maybe he could have been acknowledged a little bit. more than just a jobber. A couple of guys I want to talk about who weren't really in the running. I just remembered them and liked them a little. The Dublin Destroyer, aka Brian Costello, and Red Tyler. I really just liked the Dublin Destroyer name. I didn't realize he was Brian Costello for years. Nothing that special about him. I just liked the name, and he did occasionally get in some good licks. Red Tyler, I thought, had a great look. He was really chiseled. One hilarious Red Tyler moment was when he was taking on Papa Shango on an episode of Primetime, I believe. And Sean Mooney starts putting Tyler over, saying he has so much respect for him and so much courage to get in the ring with Shango. Then Lord Alfred Hayes comes in with, I think he's stupid. Just utterly annihilates the guy. Doesn't give him half a chance in the match. But hey, that's what he was there for. He was never meant to win. One last honorable mention, and it's a shame he was ever considered a jobber because he was one half of a very talented and popular tag team, was Jumpin' Jim Brunzell, the Killer Bee. At the end of his WWE tenure, Brunzell was a job guy who could work. He always got in some offense, and there was a feeling he could win, but he ultimately lost. The announcers did tend to treat him as more of a formidable threat than most jobbers, so it was good to see them recognize his skill, even though he wasn't being treated as much of a threat to the stars. Alright, so I've talked a lot about who missed the list, so you're probably wondering, who is on the list? I'm glad you asked. I'm going to kick it off with my favorite jobber, the Brooklyn Brawler, real name Steve Lombardi. He wrestled under his real name for a while, but to me, he was, is, and always will be the Brooklyn Brawler. He had such a great look, that raggedy shirt, the hat, the cigar, and he could wrestle. I almost always thought he was going to pull off an upset, unless he was just facing a monster like The Undertaker. He showed no fear. He looked great in most losses. He made the stars look amazing, which was his role, and he did it to perfection. And he was cocky. Even though he was a jobber, he made you feel something, and that's a big part of being a successful wrestler. Making the fans feel a certain way and putting on a great show is far more important than just winning when the results are predetermined. Brawler did manage to make a name for himself in the mid-card for a while. He had a very short feud with Bad News Brown. Bobby the Brain Heenan took him on, and Brawler got a big Saturday night's main event match opposite the Red Rooster. He also accompanied Heenan to the ring at WrestleMania 5. So he did get some time in the spotlight, however brief it may have been. He had a handful of other gimmicks as well, like Abe Knuckleball Schwartz and the Boston Brawler. He sometimes played Kimchi or Doink the Clown. In another pay-per-view, he was the Black Knight at Survivor Series 93. Nobody knew it was him, but he did get that moment. He was such a great job guy. Next, a guy who tagged with the Brawler now and then. In fact, I thought there was an outside chance that these two jobbers, generating as much heat as they did, that they may get a tag shot and even cheat to snag them for a week or two. My next selection is Barry Horowitz. He was a proud man, always patting himself on the back, and he was a fine wrestler. He'd get in his offense and make you think, maybe, just maybe, tonight's the night. He did get a shot at the tag titles with the 1-2-3 Kid. Horowitz was given a shot at the Quebecers Gold when his partner Reno Riggins was hurt. The Kid stepped in on Raw and they had a heck of a match. Horowitz was also a participant in Survivor Series 93 as the Red Knight. And later on, after my time, he enjoyed some success defeating Body Domino Skip and got a small push, a tiny token of appreciation for the time he put in and the rest of the wrestlers he elevated. Now, on to yet another jobber who had a little mid-card success, Jim Powers. The success I'm referring to is as one half of the Young Stallions with Paul Roma. They once scored a DQ win over the Hart Foundation when the Hart Foundation were tag champs. Of course, the belts didn't change hands because they can only change on a pinfall or submission. The Young Stallions had some nice showings at Survivor Series, but they split without any fanfare, and fans barely noticed when Powers slipped back into his original role, which was the role as a jobber. That said, Powers always looked poised to win. He executed moves brilliantly. He was built like a star. It's surprising Vince McMahon didn't push a guy with his look. I don't like to talk about things I don't know a ton about or things that have been beaten to death, but I will briefly mention that there have been rumors that Power was never pushed the way you might expect because he didn't succumb to Pat Patterson's advances. I don't know if there's any truth to that, and I don't want to speculate any further. If you aren't familiar with Pat Patterson, look him up. A lot of stories aren't pretty, just to forewarn you. Meanwhile, Powers went back to job status. Roma got to team with Hercules in Power and Glory, and also got to be in the Four Horsemen in WCW for a bit. I wasn't a WCW kid, but I was aware of its existence, and I know the Horsemen were a pretty big deal. So I was surprised that Roma got that chance. I thought Powers was the better worker of the two, and he should have gotten some chances to prove it, but the WWE had other plans for Powers, and he's a tale of what if. And rounding out my jobber Mount Rushmore, Mount Jobbermore, whatever you want to call it, Iron Mike Sharp. Apparently, and I learned this from Lanny Poffo, Sharp was a clean freak. He was extremely weary of germs and showered multiple times a day, which I'm sure delighted Pat Patterson. Finding out he was a clean freak cracked me up a bit because I always thought the guy looked a little dirty. But as far as Sharp in the ring, he was another guy who I thought would pull off an upset someday. He was a good wrestler. He teamed with Hulk Hogan in Japan. Early in the 80s, he was managed by Captain Lou Albano and seen as legitimate competition. He was in a Dolly Parton music video called Headlock on My Heart. She had a short-lived sketch show, and she sang that song. Hogan was playing a character named Starlight, and he was shown manhandling another wrestler in the ring, and that wrestler happened to be Iron Mike Sharp. So, nice little claim to fame for the man known as Canada's greatest athlete. Personally, I think Wayne Gretzky might have something to say about that nickname, but I didn't give that name to Mike, so he earned it. Well, that does it for my Jobber Mount Rushmore, Jobbermore, whatever, any way you say it. The mountain has been revealed, and there's nothing more to say today. Thanks for listening to the first episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you come back. I can't wait to see you next time. Go Birds!